Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the BMW R1300 GS Automated Shift Assistant, which I got in for review kind of by accident and have spent the last month and 1,000 miles or so getting to know. Now, if you watched that first video I did on the bike, you'll recall that when I got on it, it was kind of riding it blind, figuring it out as I went along. But since then, as I say, I've covered some distance, I've done the commute on it, I've kind of lived with the bike a bit, and I feel like I've unlocked some of its secrets. So I thought I'd make another video and just update you on that. And also on my personal evolution from an initial position of perhaps slight skepticism about the whole BMW GS thing through to grudging admiration at the end of the last video, and perhaps even to a level of something bordering on enthusiasm. Now, I'm probably kidding myself when I say that I'm too young to be the target audience for a bike like this, but it still feels like I'm a little bit early in my riding career to be having my GS moment and settling on this as the one bike to do it all. It just feels like there are a lot more motorbikes to ride before I end up in this inevitable place. In terms of the bike itself, I obviously went over it in some detail in the previous video, so I won't go over all that again. But I have since had the spec sheet through on this particular bike, and I can tell you that the bottom line price for this one is £22,595, which is a chunk. That includes the triple black pack, it includes the automatic vehicle ride height control system that we talked about in the previous video. That also includes the riding assistant package, which is the radar cruise control, the forward collision alerts, the blind spot alerts, things like that. Also includes a heated seat and the additional LED fog lights up front, the last two of which have been very useful on the dark and murky commute over the moors to the day job. Plenty more that I've learnt about the bike since I've been riding it, but today is literally, I think, the first day of dry roads since I've had the bike, so let's pick up the conversation on the move. Right, so welcome to chapter 2 in my journey of discovery into the world of the BMW GS. And while I usually start these videos up on the kind of the nice roads, the more inspirational riding roads, I thought I'd start this one with some slightly lower speed stuff to kind of demonstrate some points about the automated shift assistant gearbox, which have been interesting to learn with the bike. Obviously it's the big talking point with this particular GS, so there's some of its kind of low speed behaviour which is perhaps more interesting to talk about in this context. Also I needed to go and get some fuel, so that kind of kills two birds with one stone. But sort of reflecting on the gearbox, it's interesting to think that with this bike BMW has gone for, or in car terms, it's kind of an old technology, because in its cars, BMW used to use what it called SMG, which is sequential manual gearbox, which is what we have here. It's a conventional gearbox with automated clutch and shift functions. So that's different from the dual clutch gearboxes and automatic that it now mainly uses, and some rivals like Honda use in their bikes. So in some ways it's an old technology, and back when BMW used to use it, particularly in its M cars, it was always thought of as a little bit clunky, a little bit slow, which is why now its cars have pretty much gone exclusively to dual clutch or full autos. So the advantages of it are that it's lighter and cheaper than a dual clutch gearbox. And BMW seems to think in a motorbike context it can make it smooth enough. In fact, one of the claims is that you don't have, when you've got a pillion, you're not going to get head clattering lurches as you go up and down the gears. Now, as you'll have perhaps seen at these kind of low speeds, I don't think it's quite as smooth as BMW is claiming. You do get the odd lurch through the gears, which, were I to have a pillion on board, I think would result in conking helmets together. So it's not bad, but it is very keen to upshift, as you'll see, you know, going up quite a steep hill, and it's straight away defaulted to third gear. Now we've got a hill start here. As you'll see, it's pretty slick about the way it downshifts to first. I've got the hill hold, so when I pull away, it's very smooth. But you'll see in those kind of upshifts, particularly at low revs, at kind of town speeds, they are not the smoothest. And when you switch to the manual mode, if you override the shifts yourself, if you just bang them through at low revs like the bike wants to do, there's still a bit of a nod. So if you are after a bike with a slick automatic gearbox, I would still say the dual clutch on the Honda Africa Twin is probably the slicker system. And it's interesting that an Africa Twin, I think they call it the Sports Adventure, don't they? The one that's, there you go, there was a bit of an awkward downshift, fourth to third as we go down this hill. Yeah, the Africa Twin Sports Adventures, I think they call it, which is the one with the smaller front wheel, the more kind of road optimised one, which would be an alternative to this GS. That is £2,000 less with the DCT, with the electronic suspension. So interesting that BMW is in effect charging more for an older technology. The argument being, as I say, that automated manuals like this are lighter and simpler, and weight saving has been a big part of the GS package. So yes, in conclusion, at these low speeds, automated shift assistant is not perhaps as slick as BMW might have promised. And I think that in a lot of situations I could actually be smoother with a conventional manual. Anyway, here we are at the filling station, so let's fill up and we'll get out on some more interesting roads and try it there. So, fresh tank of fuel, and I'm out here on the road that is part of my commute, and for the first time ever on the bike is actually dry. This is, as I say, the first time in a month I think I've ridden this bike in the dry, which is a novelty in its own right and makes things a little bit more interesting. So what have I learnt in that time about this bike? Well, it's faster than you might think. I was out here yesterday shooting, and my friend was riding this bike and I was riding the Vosges, and he absolutely left me for dead without even trying along this road. Didn't see which way he went, and when we got to the end of it he said, oh, I wasn't really pushing on, I was just going with the flow. So the bike can cover ground like this a lot quicker than you might expect. And out here I tend to use the gearbox in its manual mode just because I prefer having a bit of control, and to be honest, in this context it just feels like a really slick quick shifter really. And overall I've missed the clutch a lot less than I thought I would. I think the automated shift assistant kind of suits the character of the GS. You know, it's a big high-tech bike, and having it shift gears itself is kind of fits the bill. So less impressed with it around town, but beyond that it's a nice to have. Would I spend 750 quid on it? I'm not sure, but certainly been interesting to try it out, so I don't begrudge that. What about the rest of the bike on a road like this? Well, one thing I really have enjoyed when the road's been greasy and it's dark and all the rest of it is that suspension. So I said before how plush it was, and I think one of the benefits of that is when you're not sure how much grip you've got. The kind of consistency of the tyre contact pressure really makes it confidence inspiring when you're really not sure what kind of grip you've got to play with. So now that the road's dry, obviously it's a bit different, but when it wasn't, that super push suspension really has made a difference. So I've been very much appreciative of that. And now that the road is dry, and I can up the pace a little bit more than before, and I've got it's into dynamic mode, so the damping is a little bit firmer. It feels really good, and as I was saying, a lot more chuckable than you might have credited for a bike of this type. So that's a bit of a revelation. And I think one of the things that surprised me is I thought this would be a big, tall, top-heavy adventure bike in its handling, but it really isn't. You really feel like you can chuck it into the bends. It's interesting, now the roads are drying out, I'm starting to feel that the performance, although impressive, I think you do notice that deficit over what you get in a multi-strada. So if you really want to crack on, I think the Ducati has got that little bit more. I'm not saying I'm winding it out to the throttle stops all the time, but it's definitely, you're reaching the limit of what it can do. Up to that point, I really like the kind of creamy power delivery of this Boxer Twin. It's really nice, smooth, creamy, like I say. It's a pleasure to use. Interestingly, I was riding it before without earplugs in when I was just going down to the petrol station, and it's slightly less refined at lower speeds than you might think. A little bit clattery on the valve chain and all that kind of thing. That's on a new bike, so it'll be interesting to know what it's like a few miles under its belt. But yes, it's a lovely engine, and the engine, gearbox, combo, the chassis, all that kind of stuff, all hangs together really nicely. And it's more fun than I would have ever have credited a GS as being as well. So that's been a bit of a surprise. I like the other stuff as well, the interactions with the bike are really neat. So this control wheel thing here that you use for the menus, it kind of reminds me of BMW's iDrive system that it has in its cars with the central control wheel, which was so controversial when it came out, but has evolved into one of, I think, the best multimedia interactions in any modern car brand. So it's interesting that that's one of the things that BMW has kind of translated from its cars into its bikes. I still don't understand why the screen can't just run CarPlay. You have to do all the navigation through an app, and if you want mapping, I think you have to put your phone up on that display there. But it still messes with my head that bikes don't just run CarPlay. You've got the screen, you've got the connection. Somebody tell me why, I'd be very interested. But the app seems very slick, the navigation on it works really well, so it is there and it works better than a lot of others. So that's impressive as well. I also like the fact that on the run, the buffeting seems to be very well addressed with this adjustable screen and these little clear deflectors here as well. So on the motorway it's really comfortable and refined. It feels like you can just go for miles in whatever weather. So even when the rain's been lashing down, it just seems to kind of cocoon you. It doesn't seem, whatever weather I've ridden this bike through, it just seems to be like, yeah, whatever, we'll just get on. So particularly the time of year that I have been riding it, that's been really appreciated as well. So objectively, it's a very, very difficult bike to fault. And it's got a much broader bandwidth of abilities than I ever expected. So there we go. There's some of the stuff I've learned in my unexpected month on the GS. As I say, the roads are dry for the first time since I've had it, so I think I'm going to crack on and enjoy that. So there we go, no surprises, the GS did impress me a great deal, and I think I now understand a lot more about why these bikes are so popular. Would I be buying one though, were I in the fortunate position to have 20 grand to spend on a new bike? I think no, and I'll take you back to what I was saying in the introduction about the fact that for where I am in my personal riding journey, or whatever we want to call it, there are still loads of other bikes I want to try out and experience before I end up with the probably inevitable conclusion that yes, a BMW GS is all the bike you actually need. Ask me in 10 years, we'll see where we're at. In terms of the bike as a whole, as I say, impressed is a word I'm going to keep coming back to, because I started out in the first video asking whether the technology would be an enabler or just baffling. I think it does make the riding experience better. Things like the ride height control, the fact you can flat-foot it around at low speeds, that's a huge confidence boost for riders of any experience level or size. Just makes handling what is otherwise a big and quite intimidating bike so much easier. The radar cruise control is a really nice feature. The way the suspension just turns a wet road into a dry one, and you can ride it in all conditions with a similar level of confidence. That's really, really impressive. There we go, you can keep count of those. So yes, it's just been a really fantastic experience and an unexpected one, but I've really, really enjoyed it. I'm really privileged to have had this opportunity to test my prejudices in this way. Any niggles? Well, the forward collision warning thing with the radar, it's not quite as annoying as it is on cars because it doesn't slam on the brakes in the same way, thankfully, but I did trigger it accidentally when I was just filtering through traffic. It went off, everything flashed red. You can turn it off, you can adjust the sensitivity, so there is that, and apparently off does mean off on bikes, not like cars where it comes back every time you turn it back on. So there's that. I was interested to see that when you set up the rider modes, you can't have them all available on the hotkey on the handlebars. You can only have a few of them, but I guess as an owner you would probably pre-configure the ones that you needed, and you'd set them up with the right level of ABS, traction control, damping, all that kind of thing. So probably not an issue for an owner, but just something that I did notice. Other than that, very difficult bike to fault, and I have enjoyed the experience of riding it a great deal. I hope you enjoyed the video as well. If you did, make sure you hit like. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. Let me know what you think of the bike and the video in the comments. I'd love to talk to you there. And for the meantime, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching, and ride safe.